flu is on the move. The virus has arrived in yet another province.
They're concerned about any health problem that's on the mainland. It's not going to stay there.
Showing the vaccine only thought to be 10% effective.
Nationwide, there are already more than 41,000 cases confirmed. Every state in the country reporting widespread flu activity.
As of this morning, 18 countries around the world have reported cases of the flu within their borders.
Numbers out of Australia as of mid-October are concerning. If you get sick, stay home.
Alexander the Great by Philip Freeman. So as I said before in the ancient Greek course that I took, I feel like it kind of almost blew over Alexander the Great's contribution pretty quickly. Could have been a little more detailed, but he did have the whole ancient Greece thing to cover, and I'm sure he had to keep things moving just to kind of evenly space out what he was going to cover and not focus too much on certain historical figures. And I'm sure there were a few other ones that could have been elaborated on a little bit more, like Leonidas, but that's okay. That's why I bought this book. And to be clear, there's something about books like this that it's almost like a conflict. The author does an excellent job of taking the life of Alexander the Great and building a narrative from beginning to end, smoothly hitting the main points of his life, separating a little bit of fact from fiction, because with a character like Alexander the Great, there's a lot of legend that goes along with it. For example, the Gordian knot, of which he does cover. So the book itself was written very good, but Alexander the Great, being one of the most revered people from history, there's statues of him everywhere, there's mentions of him everywhere, people reference him as one of the greatest conquerors ever to have lived, and so on. But one thing that stands out to me when you read about perhaps your ancient heroes, not Napoleon, not so much, but Alexander the Great, Caesar, other historical figures like that, they won the vast majority of their battles. They have statues built to them all over the place, and because they're the victors, their statues are there to stay. But these people were not nice. They had a small people that they kept happy around them, but they were fierce, brutal individuals that would have made Hitler look like a puppy dog. But Hitler lost, so now Hitler is like a great stain on history. People like Alexander the Great, easily as bad as Hitler. But when you hear Alexander the Great, you think conqueror, you don't think oppressor. But what he did, for example, to the city of Tyre was located on an island, and he started throwing in debris and created a land bridge. And as he was building his bridge further and further, the people of Tyre thought that they would never be conquered because they were on an island. They'd row out just outside of arrowshot with their rowboats and taunt Alexander's army, which to me seems like a horrible idea when you have an army at your door. And eventually, Alexander the Great's army did make it to Tyre. And what they did to Tyre was so brutal and horrible, but yet somehow he's still kind of one of those historical figures that isn't really seen as a monster, even though if you read a book like this, you really see kind of what that guy had to do. Granted, it is the ancient world, and most rulers were that way. He did a lot of stuff, conquering the Persians, for example, but that could be argued as kind of what his father, Philip, wanted to do, and eventually he died, and Philip was no puppy dog either. That guy also was a monster who was murdered because of what he had done to people around him, and when you read the account of that, well, you think, well, it's no wonder he got murdered, because he was really stinking mean. Anyways, Alexander the Great picks up where his father left off. He already had the campaign planned, he had the people ready to go, the army's ready to go, and his father dies, and Alexander the Great takes over. Now, he was completely arrogant. And sometimes the really arrogant people like that think they can change the world are actually the ones that do. It's almost like the perfect storm. You had kind of a spoiled brat, arrogant Alexander the Great. Also, he had the means to take out the Persians, which was obviously a turning point for history. I mean, what would the modern world look like today had he not been around to take out the Persians? Maybe someone else would have. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe Europe would have changed and gone a different route. Nobody knows. And despite all that, he was a great leader, but he was very brutal. And part of that was his reputation that got him into a lot of cities that opened their doors, because they didn't think that they were going to be able to stand against his army and thought if they opened their doors that they'd get a break. Some of them did, some of them did not. Some opened their doors to Alexander the Great because they didn't want to put up a fight and get raped and killed and all kinds of other horrible things, and they did it anyway. So he was very unpredictable. And as we all know, Alexander the Great died very young, and his empire was broken up by his 4 generals. That part is also covered. But the thing is he was a flash in the pan. He was a force that changed the map, changed the borders, but ultimately it was spread too thin. He would constantly have to backtrack when there's warring states in Greece and kind of keep things in order. His empire, probably because he was so young, probably because it was still kind of new being built. Had he lived a long life, maybe he would have been able to make it stable. But because he died, it basically died with him. So back to how the book was written. I think it's a rich example of that point in history. You get a good sense of what things were like back then. And again, I think it's odd that people like that were so brutal, but yet there's still statues of Alexander the Great all over the place. And another common thing I'm starting to notice is with these people who they get to the top of what their power is. The tippy top of rulership. They're an emperor. And that's not enough. They keep reaching. Like with the Egyptians, they weren't just rulers, they were gods. Well, Alexander the Great kind of started to get like that too. An arrogance to him. Well, I want to be worshipped. I don't want to just be a ruler. I want to be loved and worshipped by my people. So that's also a common theme with the ancient world I'm starting to see. They want to be seen as larger than life, more than just man, a representative of the gods on earth. So check it out. A great addition to the history courses that I've been reading and listening to. They filled in a lot of the gaps as far as like with the ancient world of Greece. I think I'm done with this period in history. I think I'm going to move onward to Rome, and I already have a Roman course picked out, which will be reviewed the next time. So I strongly recommend this book. Let me know if you've read it, what you thought about it below. Maybe I'm looking too much into it. Again, that is kind of how things were back then, just brutal kings, and that sometimes that's what they needed to keep their people in line, so to speak. Sometimes to control an unruly group of people, you need to become a monster. And that's been also shown in history. But then again, what do I know? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time.